summer afternoon, summer afternoon. To Henry James, who loved nature and gardens, those were the two most beautiful words in the English language. The best place to spend a summer afternoon is in a country garden, where children can play and dogs can run, and no one worries about trampling the grass. In all the history of gardens and garden styles, the country garden is the most down-to-earth. Unlike grand formal gardens, the country garden is a cozy place for people and plants.
The garden in the country, a soft, gentle, romantic place, heady with smell, taste and touch, had its origins in the most practical of purposes. Humans first gardened to feed themselves. The bounty of the garden was a true measure of its importance and even of its beauty. The country garden is a distillation of the country around it, an earthly paradise where the soil is literally life-sustaining. The relationship of the countryman to his garden is as close as that of the Native American Indian to his plain, where cultivation has been a noble act, attended by a reverence for sun, rain, and soil. Today, the country garden is part of its surroundings in a way that its smaller urban counterpart can never be. Creating and maintaining a country garden encompasses much more than just horticulture and decoration. It is a matter of husbandry, a concern for the conservation and preservation of natural planting and the spirit of the land. What the formal garden might consider a weed is here a thing of beauty, for the country garden is a lesson in what grows wild and how it grows. In America, the democratic ideal is expressed in the country garden, where every plant has an equal place. The great poet Longfellow, who was also a garden enthusiast, once commented that, aside from the Garden of Eden, man's great temptation took place when he first received his seed catalogue. Garden designer Ryan Gainey created here in Decatur, Georgia, an intimate environment that, like all cottage gardens, is a unique reflection of personality.
This idea of creating a romantic garden finds its heart in one of the most beloved garden styles that there is, and that is the cottage garden, or the country garden. And whether that cottage or country garden is in the city or in the country, what it is to that individual is self-expression. It's not the kind of garden that you really could go and make for someone else. For me, for the romance in my life to come to fruition meant making a garden. And part of that garden was choosing all the plants from part of my childhood, places I've been, things that I liked, that I wanted to have for myself. And then, as a gardener, learning how to put them together and keep all of those ideas intact. The soul of a cottage garden is charm. And charm is not something that just happens, even though it's a delightful experience. It's understanding color, form, texture, how certain plants grow, how that this aster, though it grows straight up all summer, becomes a wonderful tumbling mass of purple in the fall, mixing with other plants like the Salvia van Hoodii. But you see, it doesn't always happen the way you plant it. What does seem to happen so much in a cottage garden, and the ones I've visited all over the world, is those unbelievable happy mistakes when this one plant comes up with another plant. You never would have thought to do it yourself, but all of a sudden there it is. And then you have another wonderful, brilliant inspired combination that in and of your own you never would have thought of. And that's sort of really, I guess, the magic of a cottage garden.
Since medieval times, the cottage garden was the mainstay of rural life. Just as the formal garden was the domain of kings, the country garden was an expression of farmer and forester. Utilitarian in purpose, these gardens are a testament to the skill and wisdom of those who learned to live on the land. Originally, the garden was regarded as a retreat from the harshness of nature, its overpowering scale and its lurking dangers. A nightly enclosure for beasts, it protected all who lived within. As the need for enclosure diminished, early gardens became a microcosm of the adjoining cultivated land, providing fruit, herbs, and vegetables. Sprinkled among these were garden flowers, grown not for pleasure, but to stimulate the growth of vegetables and to ward off insects. The beauty offered by fruit orchards in spring blossom was incidental, for their sole purpose was to provide the farmer's wife with all she needed for her table.
One of the reasons the English talk about the weather so much is that gardening is a national pastime. Any plot of earth is a garden waiting to happen.
In America, pioneer women stitched samplers and quilts to reflect the patchwork look of the newly tamed land. In Europe, our image of the country garden starts to change in the 19th century, when an emergent industrial society and creeping urbanization unleashed a yearning for a simpler lifestyle. The nostalgia for a country garden was as much for the character of an uncluttered landscape as for the garden itself. Artists were inspired by the rustic ways of the past, the cottage with its herbs, vegetables, and old-fashioned flowers.
As the contrast between city and country life increased, the cottage garden came to represent an idyllic, less complicated world. As garden designer Gertrude Jekyll wrote, "Not infrequently, in passing along a country road, with eye alert to note the beauties that are so often presented by little wayside cottage gardens, something is seen that may well serve as a lesson in better planting. The lesson is generally one that teaches greater simplicity." With its unstudied profusion of flowers and vegetables, the cottage garden remains peaceful, personal, and practical.
Garden designer John Brooks.
I think you can see that these sort of gardens were usable for the family, obviously, who lived in the cottage. It's where they're going to hang the washing, where the tools were stored, where they stored their logs for winter. There was often a privy in the garden, and they even kept a pig in the garden, which was useful for composting, of course. The flowers still remain this traditional form of gentle campanula and real wallflowers growing out of a wall as they're supposed to. And I think probably the great difference in the 20th century cottage garden is that, of course, there is a lawn here. And if you were a farm worker living in Gloucestershire in the 18th century, who wanted a lawn, for heaven's sake? Their cows ate the grass out on lawns surrounding this site. And of course you had nothing to cut it with either.
Here in the English Cotswolds, in the cottage gardens of Hidcote Bartram, it's hard to remember that country folk had no time for fashion or ornament. Village life was a well-ordered universe, illustrating the simple dictum advocated by William Wordsworth: "Let nature be our teacher."
The form of the country garden is very much conditioned by the setting in which it is, whether it's on flat ground or hilly ground, obviously, and then the materials of which it's made. It's a sort of symbiosis of everything that happens round about it, and indeed the cultivation that goes on in the garden are affected by that as well. And then The mood and feel inside the garden is one of what we call old-fashioned flowers along with herbs, in that they tend not to be hybridized versions of a traditional form of plant. It's very much simpler, the vegetation here. You might get a double poppy, but it's a poppy nevertheless. I think this is a very typical cottage garden. The interesting thing about them was that they were not essentially designed as we know it. There were obviously paths going to the doors, but not much else. The rest was infilled with plant material. And the plant material was very much muddled, I think you'd call it, including the herb material. And then it's just soft, gentle plants with a great fragrance in most of them. They hadn't been hybridized to the nth degree. You'll see in this garden the spring succession dying down, the dead bluebells and the dead narcissus, the pansies coming away, the single marigolds, again they're not huge overblown double things, dahlias coming through for later summer interest, and for North Americans here we've got some goldenrod, which they used an awful lot of in the cottage garden. Poppies we've talked about before, wonderful brilliant colours, and here's a real cottage garden flower, and it smells wonderful, Sweet William, beautiful velvety sort of colour. Over here we've got sweet peas before again the hybridizer got at them, just the wild sort of form, and there it all is.
In England, as well as the continent, these gardens were in natural harmony with the surrounding worked land. Here in France, for example, the planting of vegetables was interspersed with vines and fruit trees. Flowers weren't cultivated for use inside the house, but rather for the glory of God at church, or for placement on local shrines. The idea of cottage gardens in the country changed forever when they were discovered by 19th century artists. A passion for capturing colour and light brought painters outdoors to study nature in plein air. Impressionism was born in a world of flowers, fields and meadows. The natural wildness of a country garden was seen as a romantic ideal. In the Garden of Eden, wisdom was an apple from the tree of knowledge, and ever since, the orchard has occupied a special hold on the imagination. From country to country, changes in climate and geography produce memorable tableaux of rolling hills and orchards. These beloved groves of trees in the hills of Tuscany still radiate an almost mythological mystique.
Romantic, strangely lovely Nympha, a medieval village built in the Pontine marshlands and named after a tiny Roman temple that used to stand here. Nympha was once considered a place of magic. Its lake inhabited by nymphs and benevolent gods. The river that flows through the town is said to be the tears shed by the young noblewoman Nympha, who mourned endlessly upon learning of her lover's death.
"2 hours south of Rome, sheltered by high hills and fed by glistening streams, Nympha is a pastoral dream that perfectly illustrates the romantic ideal of a country environment. "600 years ago, the town began a calamitous decline, suffering through malaria, fire, and violent religious struggles. But as Nympha proves, all human destruction can be healed by nature and time. These towers and church stones, abandoned to pontine marshes and moisture, were in 1922 rescued by an Italian prince of the Caetani family, who turned the ruined City of Dreams into one of the most beautiful gardens of the world. The old walls and architectural remnants of this medieval village provide startling focal points through the lush garden plantings. When Prince Caetani died in 1935, the garden restoration was continued first by his sister-in-law and then by his niece, Margaret, a literary Bostonian who had a Henry Jamesian sensibility and adventurous horticultural taste. For her, the connection between art and nature led to a natural balance between the crumbling of walls and the unfolding of petals. There is sweet music here, that softer falls than petals from blown roses on the grass, or night dews on still waters between walls of shadowy granite in a gleaming pass. Here are cool mosses deep, and through the moss the ivies creep, and in the stream the long-leaved flowers weep, and from the craggy ledge the poppy hangs in sleep.
What has been destroyed by time has not been restored, but what has remained has been preserved. What was once a neglected wild thicket sprawled with greenery is now a bewitching, enchanted mass of tangled sweetness. Nympha, a romantic affirmation of the freedom of expression possible in a country garden. A kitchen garden is so pretty and so comforting.
For many, the essence of country gardening is still the vegetable patch.
To me, one of the greatest luxuries in the world is to walk out into your own vegetable garden and pick tomatoes still warm from the sun, or fresh parsley and peas, leeks and onions, salads and sorrel and sweet basil, tarragon, thyme, carrots, cabbages, cucumbers. And from these gifts of our generous earth, prepare a meal within minutes, which is not only fit for a king, but for your family.
The idea of a proper kitchen garden is one of the great rediscoveries of our time. They were first created to supply the culinary needs of country houses. The list of vegetables grown in them read like a nurseryman's catalogue. Today, the vegetable and herb garden are once more in vogue, as city dwellers embrace the simplicity of country life and the satisfaction of a garden that stimulates both the eye and the palate. The country garden is a reminder that every natural landscape contains a quality of life worth preserving and nurturing. Urban blight and the overdevelopment of our resources have led to a growing appreciation for green and garden, a longing for the country that lurks within all of us. For many, Chilcombe House in England fulfills the highest expectations of a country garden. Created by Carol and John Hubbard over the last 20 years, the garden is nestled in the hills of the Dorset Downland with spectacular views to the surrounding countryside. Alleys and vistas are almost lost, submerged by exuberant plant growth. The walled garden is laid out in orderly proportions, a study in contrast flowing together with a series of enclosures or rooms. Each has a distinct mood and purpose: flowers, vegetables, orchards. The garden gives an extraordinary effect of privacy. Chilcombe House, a true country garden, at peace with its surroundings.
A country garden isn't just a collection of plants, nor is it simply a slice of the countryside. Rather, as garden expert Anne Layton said, a garden, to be a garden, must represent a different world, however small, from the real world. A source of comfort in turmoil, of excitement in dullness, security in wildness, companionship in loneliness. Gardening offers man a chance to regulate at least one aspect of his life, to control his environment and show himself as he wishes to be.